Where did you hear that lullaby? Richard Whitmore cleared his throat. He was sitting half upright on the sofa, one hand gripping the edge of a pillow. His silver hair was slightly disheveled. His tie had been loosened, hanging crookedly against his lightly wrinkled white shirt. His face still carried the heaviness of sleep, but his eyes were strangely alert. "That song," he said. Annie froze. Richard's eyes stayed fixed on her face. "Where did you hear that lullaby?" Annie swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the stack of folded towels, wrinkling the soft cotton in her hands. I heard it from..." She stopped, embarrassed by the tremble in her voice. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to sing so loudly." Before Annie could finish, Victoria Whitmore stepped in from the doorway. The sound of her heels struck sharply against the wooden floor. "Annie," Victoria said, her voice soft but cold, "don't you have work to do? Why are you standing here singing, instead of taking those towels down to the laundry room?" Annie's face flushed. "Yes, ma'am. I was just what?" Victoria cut in. "Just singing in the living room while my husband is trying to rest?" Richard turned toward his wife. "Victoria." Victoria gave him a quick smile, the kind meant to reassure him while dismissing Annie at the same time. "Don't worry about this, Richard. You've had a long day. The girl is new. She doesn't understand how things work in this house yet." "I understand, ma'am," Annie said quietly, and immediately regretted speaking. Victoria narrowed her eyes at her, but Richard spoke before she could say another word. "I asked her a question, and I'm telling you it doesn't matter," Victoria replied, moving closer to the sofa. "She was only humming, singing nonsense. Whatever it was, why does it matter so much to you?" Richard did not answer right away. That silence made Victoria's voice sharper. "Your wife is standing right here. Your family is right here. But a maid humming a few notes is suddenly more important than anything I have to say?" Annie felt the blood drain from her face. "Ma'am, I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I only sang a few lines. It was just a lullaby. I didn't mean anything by it." Victoria turned sharply toward her. "A few lines? Is that what you call it? You were lingering in the living room with that gloomy little song as if you were trying to put on a performance." "No, ma'am," Annie said quickly, shaking her head. "I was folding towels. I thought Mr. Whitmore was asleep, or resting. I didn't know he could hear me." "He heard you because you made sure he would." "That is enough," Richard said. Victoria turned back to him, startled by the firmness in his voice. "What did you just say?" "I said that is enough." Richard ran a hand over his face, then looked at Annie. "I haven't slept that peacefully in years." Victoria stiffened. "You only dozed off for a few minutes." "Without pills," Richard said. "Without Dr. Mason standing beside me, telling me how to breathe. Without the machine by my bed. Without waking up terrified. You were exhausted." "I am always exhausted." Victoria folded her arms across her chest. "So now we are pretending a maid's singing is medicine?" Annie flinched as if she had been slapped. Richard's eyes turned cold. "Do not speak about her that way." Victoria let out a short, bitter laugh. "About her? I'm talking about that song, that sad little kitchen lullaby." "Good God, Richard, you're acting as if she raised your mother from the grave." Richard stood abruptly. Annie instinctively took a step back. "Why would you insult a lullaby?" he asked. Victoria stared at him. "What?" Richard took another step toward her. "Why would you insult something that was created to comfort a child?" Victoria's face tightened. "Don't twist my words. You called it gloomy, because this is ridiculous." "No," Richard said, his voice rising. "What's ridiculous is that I slept without fear for the first time in years, and instead of asking why, you chose to insult the person whose voice gave me a few minutes of peace." Annie could hardly breathe. No one had ever defended her like that in a house like this. No one had ever weighed her feelings against someone more powerful and chosen to stand on her side. Victoria's cheeks reddened. "You're embarrassing yourself." Just then, footsteps sounded in the hallway. A young man appeared near the doorway. He wore a navy sweater and jeans, his blonde hair slightly tousled, as if he had just come from a study room or the gym. He stopped when he saw his father standing in the middle of the room, Annie frozen beside the table, and Victoria suddenly shining with tears. "Mom?" he asked. "What's going on?" Victoria turned to him as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. The anger disappeared from her face so quickly that Annie nearly doubted what she had seen only seconds earlier. In its place came a wounded, fragile expression, almost pitiful. "Ethan," Victoria said, one hand pressed to her chest, "your father is yelling at me because I asked the maid to stop singing in the living room." Richard clenched his jaw. That is not what happened. Victoria ignored him and moved toward Ethan. You see? I'm standing in my own home, only trying to keep things in order, and he speaks to me as if I'm the stranger here. Her voice caught. Your father doesn't love me anymore. He doesn't care how I feel. Clearly, my place in this family is worth less than a few little hums from the help. Ethan looked confused. Dad? Richard closed his eyes for a moment, trying to gather the last of his patience. This has nothing to do with love, Ethan. Annie sang a song. I asked her where she learned it. Victoria's tears fell faster. Or at least, she made them appear to. A song. Just a song. She gave a strained laugh and turned back to Richard. You raised your voice at me over a meaningless lullaby. Do you hear yourself? A grown man, a billionaire, standing here defending a few childish hums as if they were sacred. Annie whispered, Ma'am, please forgive me. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Victoria whipped toward her. Oh, don't start with that trembling little voice. Victoria, Richard warned, but Victoria did not stop. She tilted her head and deliberately imitated the gentle melody Annie had sung. She twisted the soft lullaby into a thin, sour, unpleasant sound. One hand swayed in the air as if rocking an imaginary baby, and then she hummed in mockery. Is that all it takes, Richard? She said, still dragging out the mocking tune. A few sweet little lines and you forget who your wife is? Annie's face burned, then went cold. That lullaby had never been a performance to her. It was the sound of her mother after a long, exhausting day at work. It was the song in their cramped apartment when Lily cried from hunger. It was the only thing that made a child believe that no matter how cruel life became, some pair of arms was still trying to hold her. And now Victoria was turning it into a joke. Richard's voice rang through the room, trembling with anger. Stop, Victoria Froze. Richard took another step forward. His face had gone pale. Do not ever mock that song again. Ethan straightened. Dad, maybe we should all calm down. Richard did not take his eyes off Victoria. No. She may be angry with me. She may misunderstand me. But she will not stand in this room and ridicule a song someone's mother once used to comfort her child. Victoria's lips parted, but no words came out. Richard turned back to Annie. The anger was still in his eyes. But when he spoke to her, his voice dropped very low. I am sorry you had to hear that. Annie shook her head quickly. It's all right, sir. No, Richard said. It is not all right. Victoria drew in a deep breath but said nothing. Annie hugged the stack of towels closer. May I return to the laundry room, ma'am? Victoria did not answer. Richard nodded once, exhaustion settling over his shoulders. Go ahead, Annie. She stepped out carefully. As she moved down the hallway, she could still feel Ethan's confused stare, Victoria's anger, and Richard's quiet pain following her. She had only sung a few lines, just a lullaby, and yet, in a house filled with money, rules, and locked doors, those few lines had awakened something no one there was truly ready to face. Annie did not stop walking until she reached the laundry room at the end of the staff hallway. Only after the door closed behind her did she set the basket of towels on the folding table and brace both hands against the edge, trying to keep herself upright. Her heart was still beating too fast, not because she had done anything wrong, but because in this house, someone like her did not always have to do something wrong to be treated as if she had. A few minutes later, Mrs. Ellery stepped in. She was the house manager, a thin woman in her early 60s with silver hair pinned tightly at the back of her head. Her face was stern, but her eyes were not as cold as her voice. I heard raised voices, Mrs. Ellery said. Annie picked up a towel and folded it too tightly, pressing creases into the fabric beneath her fingers. I'm sorry, ma'am. That is not an answer. Annie lowered her eyes. Mrs. Whitmore was upset because I was singing. In the living room? I didn't know Mr. Whitmore was there. I thought he had gone upstairs. Mrs. Ellery studied her for a moment. You should have checked first. Yes, ma'am. A short silence passed. Then Mrs. Ellery spoke again, her voice lower this time. But Mrs. Whitmore should not have spoken to you that way. Annie's hand stopped. She had not expected to hear that. Mrs. Ellery stepped closer and glanced toward the door, as if making sure no one was standing in the hallway. This house has rules, Annie. Some are written down, most are not. Mrs. Whitmore does not like surprises, and Mr. Whitmore has not slept properly in years. Today, without meaning to, you touched both of those things. I didn't want to cause trouble. No one ever does. Mrs. Ellery looked at her, her voice softening only slightly, but enough for Annie to notice. Trouble usually finds the person with the least protection. She glanced toward the hallway again. Finish folding these towels. After that, you will use the small room near the staff corridor tonight. Annie looked up quickly. Tonight? Yes. Your work schedule states that during the first month there may be nights when you are required to stay in the house. Did the agency not explain that? They said I might have to stay a few nights. I didn't know it would begin today. It begins today. Mr. Whitmore requested that you not leave the house before morning. Annie's stomach tightened. Mrs. Whitmore won't like that. No, Mrs. Ellery said plainly, she will not. Annie turned back to the stack of towels in front of her. Every few seconds, she held her breath, waiting for the sound of Victoria's heels in the hallway. But it never came. Instead, the house slowly settled into its own evening rhythm, the distant sound of dishes in the kitchen, a door closing upstairs, the faint murmur of staff changing shifts behind the walls. In the living room, Richard remained standing for a long time after Annie left. Ethan stood near the door, silent and confused, unsure whether he should comfort his mother or ask his father what had really happened. Victoria dabbed at her tears with the corner of a silk handkerchief, but by now those tears looked more like performance than pain. You embarrassed me in front of the help, she said. Richard looked exhausted, but no longer weak. You embarrassed yourself when you mocked that girl. That girl, Victoria repeated, her voice full of mockery. Listen to yourself. Richard looked toward the hallway where Annie had disappeared. For several seconds, the room was silent. Then, unexpectedly, he hummed the first few notes Annie had sung. Victoria Froze. Ethan blinked. Dad? Richard hummed again, softly but clearly. His voice was not as beautiful as Annie's. It was not even close. It was clumsy and broken, but each note sounded as if it had been pulled from somewhere deep inside his memory. If this scene touched your heart, please like this video. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about hidden memories, healing, and second chances. Victoria's face hardened. Don't. Richard looked at her. Why not? It's only a useless lullaby, isn't it? You are being childish. No, mocking it was childish. You're doing this to punish me. I'm doing this because, this time, I can remember it. He hummed another line, quieter now, almost only for himself. I thought that song was gone. Victoria folded her arms. You don't even know if it's the same song. I know. How? Richard placed one hand over his chest, not dramatically, not as a performance, simply as if the answer had been there all along. Because I felt it before I understood it. Ethan moved a little closer to the doorway. What song is it, Dad? Richard's eyes softened when he looked at his son. Your grandmother used to sing it. Grandma Margaret? Yes. I've never heard it. No, Richard said. You haven't. I stopped talking about those things after she died. Victoria turned her face away. It's just old grief, nothing more. Maybe, Richard replied. But old grief doesn't put a man to sleep. Not like that. Ethan looked toward the staff hallway. So Annie knows it? Her mother taught it to her. Victoria let out a short laugh. How convenient. Richard's face went cold. Careful. Victoria stepped closer to him. You're going to let a maid stir up this entire house because she hummed a familiar tune? No, Richard said. I'm going to find out why the song my mother used to sing came from a young woman working in my laundry room. Do you hear yourself? I hear myself more clearly than I have in years. The conversation ended there. Victoria left first, her hand tightening around the handkerchief. Ethan lingered for a few more seconds. Dad, he said quietly, are you okay? Richard looked at his son, and for the first time that day, the anger disappeared from his face. I don't know. Ethan nodded, looking as if he did not know what to do with honesty from a man who was more used to giving orders than confessing weakness. Richard sat down on the sofa. Go upstairs. After Ethan left the room, Richard leaned back and closed his eyes. At the end of the hall, Annie finished the towels and carried them to the linen closet. Afterward, Mrs. Ellery led her to the small room where she would sleep that night. The room was simple, almost bare, a narrow bed, a wooden chair, a small lamp, and a window overlooking the side garden. Extra blankets are in the bottom drawer, Mrs. Ellery said. Staff breakfast begins at 6. No wandering after 10 unless someone calls for you. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Ellery paused at the door. And Annie? Yes? Do not sing tonight. Annie nodded. I won't. When she was alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and took out her phone. She wanted to call her mother, but it was late, and Clara needed rest, so she sent a text instead. Mom, something strange happened at work today. Mr. Whitmore heard me singing your lullaby. He asked where I learned it. I have to stay here tonight because of the job. I'll call you in the morning. I'm okay. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The reply came slowly. That song? The one I used to sing when you couldn't sleep? Annie texted back. Yes, Mom. This time, Clara did not answer right away. Annie stared at the screen. The little dots appeared, vanished, then appeared again. Finally, the message came through. Don't sing that song for anyone else tonight. Call me when you can. There is something I should have told you a long time ago. Annie read the message 3 times. A strange chill traveled down her spine. She lay down without changing clothes, still wearing her blouse and work skirt, listening to the breathing of the great house around her. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed. Pipes clicked behind the wall. Far away, perhaps from the living room, she heard a low sound. At first, Annie thought it was the air conditioner. Then she realized it was Richard Whitmore. He was humming the lullaby again. At 6 the next morning, the staff kitchen smelled of coffee, toast, and bacon kept warm under foil. Annie had slept in pieces, waking each time the old house creaked or the heat clicked on behind the wall. By dawn, she had folded her blanket twice, washed her face in the small bathroom, and pinned her hair back so tightly it made her temples ache. Mrs. Ellery was already at the counter, pouring coffee into a white mug. You look like you spent the night counting ghosts. Annie reached for a plate. I didn't sleep much. That makes 2 of you. Mrs. Ellery stirred cream into her coffee. Mr. Whitmore was in the library before 5. Annie kept her eyes on the toast. Is he angry? With you? No. Mrs. Ellery took a slow sip. With the rest of his life, perhaps. Annie did not know how to answer that. She buttered 1 slice of toast, then changed her mind and put the knife down. Her stomach was too tight for food. The other staff moved around her carefully. A groundskeeper nodded good morning. The cook, Mr. Alvarez, slid a small bowl of grits toward her without comment. People in houses like this heard everything, even when they pretended not to. Annie could feel the questions hanging over the table. What did she sing? Why did Mrs. Whitmore cry? Why did Mr. Whitmore defend her? None of them asked out loud. After breakfast, Mrs. Ellery handed Annie a list. Guest bedrooms on the east side, then the downstairs powder room. Avoid the main sitting room unless called. Yes, ma'am. And Annie? Annie looked up. If Mrs. Whitmore speaks to you, answer only what she asks. Nothing more. Annie nodded. That was advice she understood. She worked through the morning without humming. The silence felt unnatural. At home, work and song belonged together. Her mother hummed while sweeping, while washing greens, while counting pills into a plastic organizer. Annie had learned early that a song could make a hard task feel less like surrender. In the Whitmore house, even her breath felt supervised. Around 10, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She was changing pillowcases in a guest room with blue wallpaper and a view of the pool. She checked the screen. Mama, call when you can. I'm awake. Annie looked toward the hallway, listened for footsteps, then stepped into the adjoining bathroom and closed the door halfway. Mama, Clara answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded rough but alert. You all right? Yes, I'm working. Can you talk? A little. Clara was quiet for a breath. That song you sang, did Mr. Whitmore say anything else? Annie leaned against the marble sink. He said his mother used to sing it. He got upset when Mrs. Whitmore mocked it. Mama, why would he know your song? It wasn't mine first. You said last night there was something you should have told me. I know. Clara coughed, then covered the phone. Annie waited, pressing her lips together. When Clara came back, her voice was softer. Years ago, before you were old enough to remember, I helped a woman who was having an asthma attack outside the Fairmont pharmacy. Her name was Margaret. Margaret Whitmore? She didn't tell me that part right away. She was proud, but not in a cruel way. More like she didn't want to be a burden. Her breathing was bad. Real bad. I had your Aunt May's inhaler in my purse, and I used it until she could get air. Why didn't you call an ambulance? I did. They were delayed. Storm had knocked branches across 2 roads, and she kept saying no hospital. She was scared of hospitals. Said she'd spent enough time watching people she loved die under white lights. Annie stared at the bathroom floor. So you brought her home? For a night, then another. Her son was traveling. Staff couldn't reach him right away. She didn't want to fuss. The word son landed hard. "Richard?" Annie said. "Yes." Annie lowered her voice. "Mama." He looked like that song hurt him. Maybe it did. Some songs carry more than melody. "Did she teach it to you?" "Not like a lesson. She sang it when she couldn't sleep. I asked about it. She said she made pieces of it up when her boy was little. Other pieces came from her own mother. I heard it enough that it stayed with me. And you sang it to me. I sang what comforted me." Annie closed her eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore thinks I'm trying to get attention from him." Clara's voice sharpened. "Are you? Mama, I know you're not. I want to hear you say it." "No, I was folding towels. I thought he was asleep." "Then stand on that. Don't let that woman put dirt on something clean." Annie heard footsteps in the hallway and straightened. "I have to go." "Annie." "Yes?" "If he asks again, tell him I remember his mother. Tell him she was kind to me too." Before Annie could ask what that meant, the call ended. She opened the bathroom door and nearly walked into Ethan Whitmore. He stepped back at once. "Sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." Annie put the phone in her pocket. "It's all right, sir. I was just finishing in here." Ethan looked younger in daylight, maybe mid-20s, though his tired eyes made him seem older. He had a travel mug in one hand and car keys in the other. "You don't have to call me, sir. Ethan is fine." Annie did not smile. "Mrs. Ellery says I should address family properly." "Mrs. Ellery says a lot of things." He glanced down the hallway. "My mom can be intense." Annie picked up the basket of pillowcases. "I should get back to work. I'm not here to bother you. I just wanted to say I don't think you did anything wrong." That made her pause. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Last night was weird. Dad doesn't usually raise his voice. Not like that. And my mom doesn't usually cry unless there's someone around to see it." Annie looked at him then, surprised by his honesty. He gave a small, embarrassed shrug. "I shouldn't have said that. I didn't hear it," Annie said. Ethan almost smiled. "Smart." For a second, the tension eased. Then he looked more serious. "What was the song?" "Just a lullaby my mama sings. Dad said Grandma Margaret sang it. That's what he said. I never knew her much. I was little when she died." His eyes moved toward the stairs. "Dad changed after that. Everybody says grief gets easier. In this house, it just got quieter." Annie held the basket tighter. She knew quiet grief. It sat in corners and waited for people to stop pretending. Ethan stepped aside. "Anyway, I'm sorry Mom mocked it." Annie nodded. "Thank you." She left before the conversation could become too personal. Kindness in that house still felt risky. By noon, Victoria had returned to control. Annie saw her in the front hall, speaking to a florist about white orchids for a charity luncheon. Her hair was smooth, her makeup perfect, her voice polite enough to chill water. When Annie passed with a tray of clean hand towels, Victoria stopped speaking. "Annie." Annie turned. "Yes, ma'am?" Victoria dismissed the florist with a look, then waited until they were alone. "I understand you spent the night here." "Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Ellery said it was part of the live-in schedule. Mrs. Ellery works for this family." "So do you." "Yes, ma'am." Victoria walked closer. "I don't know what story you think you've stepped into, but let me be clear. My husband is unwell. He is vulnerable. I will not have anyone in this house using that." Annie kept her voice steady. "I'm not using anything. You expect me to believe you just happened to sing a song his dead mother knew? I didn't know she knew it." Victoria studied her face as if searching for a lie. "And your mother?" "My mother sings it because someone once sang it to her." "Who?" Annie remembered Clara's warning. "Tell him, not her." "I don't know the full story, ma'am." Victoria's smile was thin. "Then I suggest you keep your half-stories to yourself." "Yes, ma'am." Annie turned to leave, but Victoria added, "And no singing." Annie stopped. "I understand. No humming either." Annie nodded once and walked away. That afternoon, Richard called for Mrs. Ellery, not Annie. Annie heard his voice through the half-open library door while polishing the console table in the hall. "Is she still here?" "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." "Good. I'd like to speak with her after dinner." Mrs. Ellery hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore may object." "I'm aware. Then may I suggest the breakfast room? Doors open. Staff nearby." Richard's answer came after a moment. "You're protecting her." "I'm protecting the household, sir." "No," Richard said. "You're protecting Annie." Mrs. Ellery did not deny it. "Someone should." Annie lowered her eyes and kept polishing. though the wood was already shining. After dinner, the house grew still again. Annie was in the service pantry arranging folded napkins when Mrs. Ellery came to the door. "Mr. Whitmore would like to see you in the breakfast room." Annie's heart began to pound. "Now?" "Yes, I'll be just outside." The breakfast room was smaller than the formal dining room, with pale walls, a round table, and windows looking toward the dark garden. Richard stood when Annie entered, an old-fashioned courtesy that made her uncomfortable. "Please," he said. "Sit if you'd like." "I'd rather stand, sir." He nodded, accepting it. "Fair enough." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Richard said, "I owe you an apology for last night." "You already apologized, sir." "Not properly. My home should not be a place where you are insulted for doing something harmless." Annie looked down. "I should have been quieter, perhaps. But silence has not served this house very well." She did not know what he meant, but the words stayed with her. Richard took a breath. "Did you speak with your mother?" Annie's fingers tightened around each other. "Yes, sir." "And?" "My mother said she remembers a woman named Margaret." Richard went completely still. Annie continued carefully. "She said she helped her once, years ago, when she was having trouble breathing." Richard gripped the back of the nearest chair. The color had drained from his face. "She told me there was a woman," he whispered. "My mother told me before she died. She said a stranger had shown her more kindness than people who knew her name." Annie's throat tightened. "What is your mother's name?" he asked. "Clara Carter." Richard closed his eyes. This time, when the silence came, Annie did not feel accused by it. She felt the past entering the room, slow and heavy, carrying a song neither of them fully understood yet. Richard did not ask Annie to repeat Clara's name. He heard it clearly the first time. Still, his lips moved around it once, without sound, as if the name had to pass through some locked place inside him before it could be believed. Clara Carter. For years, his mother had spoken of that woman without ever saying enough. A kind woman. A woman with tired hands. A woman who knew what to do when breath began leaving the body. Richard had meant to ask more. He had meant to find her. But his mother died. The funeral came. The lawyers came. The meetings came. And grief turned into work because work was easier to manage than guilt. Now the daughter of that woman stood in his breakfast room wearing a housemaid's uniform, twisting her fingers together, waiting to see whether the truth would cost her a job. Richard pulled out a chair but did not sit. "Your mother helped my mother breathe." "That's what she told me, sir." "When?" "I don't know the exact year. I was little." "She said it was outside a pharmacy on Fairmont Avenue. There was a storm, and the ambulance was delayed." Richard closed his eyes. "Fairmont Avenue. You know it? My mother liked an old pharmacy there. Said the pharmacist still spoke to people like neighbors." He opened his eyes, and they were wet but steady. "Did your mother say how long she stayed with her?" 2 nights, maybe 3. Richard looked toward the dark garden beyond the window. The reflection in the glass showed him a tired man in an expensive shirt, standing too straight because if he bent, he might break. "I was in Dallas," he said, "a hotel acquisition. I remember because she called me the morning I left. Her breathing sounded rough. And I told her I would be back in 3 days. I said I'd send the driver if she needed anything. She laughed at me." His mouth trembled. She said, "Richard, not every problem needs a driver." Annie listened without interrupting. "I came home, and she told me she'd had a bad spell but was all right. She said a woman had taken her in, fed her soup, sat up with her. I asked for a name. Mother said, 'One day you'll learn that kindness doesn't always hand you a business card.'" Annie almost smiled, because that sounded like something Clara would like. Richard looked back at her. "I should have looked for her. My mother never expected that." "That may be true. It doesn't absolve me." Annie lowered her eyes. She was not used to hearing rich people admit fault without turning it into someone else's burden. The door opened before she could answer. Victoria stood there, one hand on the frame, her gaze moving from Richard to Annie to the chair he had pulled out. "I was told you were meeting with staff after dinner," she said. "I didn't realize it required such an intimate setting." Richard's face tightened. "The doors are open. Mrs. Ellery is in the hall." Victoria stepped inside anyway. "How proper." Annie moved back at once. "I can leave, ma'am." "No," Richard said. Victoria gave a small laugh. "Of course not." Richard turned toward her. "Annie told me her mother is the woman who helped mine years ago." Victoria's expression did not soften. If anything, it became sharper. "And you believe that?" "I remember Mother telling me." You remember a vague story from years ago, and now this girl appears with the perfect song and the perfect mother? Annie felt the accusation land before the words finished. Mrs. Whitmore, I didn't know anything about your family. Victoria ignored her. Richard, people hear things. Staff talk. Stories spread. Your mother was beloved in this city. It would not be impossible for someone to invent a connection. Richard's voice dropped. Be careful. I am being careful. Someone in this house has to be. Annie wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. She knew that tone. It was the tone people used when they had already decided you were guilty and were only arranging the facts to make it sound reasonable. Richard stepped between them, not dramatically, just enough. Annie is not asking for anything. Not yet. Annie lifted her head. I don't want your money, ma'am. Victoria's eyes cut to her. Then what do you want? To do my work. And sing? Annie's face warmed. No, ma'am. Richard looked at her. Annie. She met his eyes only for a second. Sir, I don't want trouble for my mother. That seemed to strike him harder than anything Victoria had said. Victoria noticed. There. See? Now we are responsible for her mother, too. Richard turned on her. Enough. No, Richard. You don't get to bring strange women into our private rooms. Claim they hold memories of your mother, and then tell me to be quiet in my own home. She is not a strange woman. She is an employee, and she deserves respect. She is a maid who sang a song. She is the daughter of the woman who may have cared for my mother when I wasn't there. Victoria's mouth closed. For a moment, no one spoke. Outside, rain began again. Soft at first, tapping against the breakfast room windows. Annie heard Mrs. Ellery shift in the hallway, but not enter. Richard took a breath. I want to meet your mother. Annie looked up quickly. Sir, if she is willing, I won't force it. I won't arrive with cameras or lawyers or anything that would embarrass her. I just want to thank her. Victoria made a sound of disbelief. You're going to go to her house? Yes. Richard, think about how this looks. He stared at her. For once, I am. Victoria flushed. That is not what I meant. I know what you meant. You meant how it looks to your friends, to the board, to anyone who thinks gratitude should stay within the right zip code. Annie drew in a quiet breath. No one had ever said the quiet part that plainly in front of her. Victoria's eyes filled again, but this time Richard did not move toward her. You are turning cruel, she said. No, he replied. I am tired of calling cruelty caution. The words hung in the room. Annie knew then that the song had not only woken Richard from a nap, it had disturbed the order of the house, the kind of order that kept some people comfortable and others careful. Richard looked back at her. Would your mother see me? I don't know, Annie said honestly. She doesn't like fuss. And she's not well. Then I'll ask politely, through you. Annie nodded. I can call her. Not tonight, Victoria said. Richard did not raise his voice. Tomorrow. Victoria gave him a long look, then turned and left the room without another word. Her footsteps faded down the hall, clipped and controlled. Annie released a breath she had been holding. I'm sorry, Richard said. You don't have to keep apologizing, sir. I do if people keep injuring you under my roof. She looked at the floor. Mrs. Whitmore thinks I'm trying to take something. Richard's face softened. Are you? No. I know. The simplicity of that answer nearly undid her. Mrs. Ellery appeared in the doorway. Annie, you should get some rest. Morning comes early here. Yes, ma'am. Annie turned to leave, but Richard spoke once more. Annie, she stopped. If your mother agrees to see me, tell her I will come as Margaret Whitmore's son. Nothing more. Annie nodded. I'll tell her. That night, in the narrow room off the servants' corridor, Annie called Clara and told her everything. Clara listened without interrupting, though Annie heard the strain in her breathing. When Annie finished, Clara was quiet for so long that Annie thought the call had dropped. Mama, I'm here. He wants to meet you. Clara exhaled slowly. I figured he might. You don't have to. I know. Mrs. Whitmore doesn't believe us. That woman doesn't have to believe the sun rises for morning to come. Despite herself, Annie laughed softly. Clara coughed, then said, Tell him he can come Sunday afternoon, after church, not before. And Annie? Yes, ma'am? Make sure he understands I'm not looking for a reward. I told him. Tell him again. After they hung up, Annie lay awake in the dark. Somewhere above her, the old house settled into sleep, or tried to. She wondered if Richard was in the library again, chasing the shape of his mother's voice through silence. For the first time since taking the job, Annie understood that she had not merely entered a rich man's house. She had stepped into the unfinished grief of a family that had mistaken money for protection and silence for peace. And now, whether Victoria liked it or not, that silence had begun to crack. By Sunday afternoon, the rain had washed Atlanta clean enough to make even the sidewalks look new. Richard Whitmore sat in the back of his black sedan with a small white envelope on his lap and no idea what to do with his hands. His driver had asked twice if he wanted to bring security. Richard said no both times. He had also refused Victoria's suggestion that he send flowers first, then a lawyer, then a check through the foundation office. "You don't go empty-handed to a woman who took care of your mother," Victoria had said that morning, standing in the doorway of his dressing room with her arms crossed. "I'm not going empty-handed. A plain envelope is hardly appropriate. It's a letter." "From whom?" "From me." Victoria's mouth tightened. How touching. Richard had looked at her in the mirror. "You don't have to come." "I wasn't invited." "No, you weren't." That had ended the conversation. Now he watched the wide streets of Buckhead give way to smaller roads, older houses, corner stores, church parking lots, and barber shops with hand-painted signs. He had driven through neighborhoods like this before, usually on the way to some development site, surrounded by consultants talking about opportunity zones and tax credits. He had never arrived as a son carrying a debt. Annie had given Mrs. Ellery the address that morning. She had not ridden with him. Clara wanted her daughter home before he came, so Annie had left after breakfast in a rideshare, Richard quietly paid for through Mrs. Ellery, though he made sure Annie was not told until after the ride was booked. He had learned enough already to know that kindness could feel like control if handled carelessly. The sedan stopped in front of a small yellow house with white trim and a narrow porch. A clay pot of rosemary sat by the steps. 2 folding chairs faced the street. The lawn needed cutting, but the windows were clean and the porch swept. Richard sat still for a moment. His driver glanced back. "Want me to wait here, sir?" "Yes, but not in front of the house. Pull down a little. Give them privacy." "Yes, sir." Richard stepped out with the envelope and walked up the short path. Before he reached the porch, the door opened. Annie stood there in a pale blue blouse and dark skirt. No apron, no folded towels, no uniform to hide inside. In her own doorway, she looked younger and stronger at the same time. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Annie, my mama's in the kitchen. She said you can come in." He nodded and wiped his shoes carefully on the mat before entering. The house was small, but it had a warmth the Whitmore mansion had misplaced years ago. There were framed church programs on the wall, a photo of Annie in a graduation gown, a shelf of worn cookbooks, and a quilt folded over the arm of the sofa. Something was simmering on the stove, onions and chicken broth. Maybe thyme. Richard stopped, just inside the door, caught by the smell. Annie noticed. "Mama made soup. I remember my mother mentioning soup. She said sick people should never be asked questions on an empty stomach." Richard almost smiled. "Your mother sounds wise." "She is." Clara Carter sat at the kitchen table in a cardigan, her hair wrapped in a soft gray scarf, a small oxygen machine nearby but not turned on. She was thinner than Richard expected, with tired eyes and hands that looked as if they had spent a lifetime working before anyone thanked them. When he entered, she began to rise. "Please don't," Richard said quickly. "Mrs. Carter, please." Clara settled back, studying him. "You look like your mother around the eyes." The word struck him harder than any greeting could have. He placed one hand on the back of a chair. "May I sit?" "This is a kitchen, Mr. Whitmore. Folks sit in kitchens." Annie pulled out the chair across from Clara, then moved to the stove, giving them room but staying close enough to hear. Richard sat, the envelope resting between his hands. For a moment, all the phrases he had prepared sounded useless. Clara helped him by speaking first. "Annie says you heard the song." "Yes. And it troubled you." "It brought me peace first, then it troubled me." Clara nodded as if that made sense. "That's how old memories behave." Richard looked at her hands. "My mother told me someone helped her when she couldn't breathe. She never gave me your name. I asked once, maybe twice. I should have asked again. She didn't owe you all the details while she was sick." "No, but I owed her enough attention to listen." Clara did not soften the truth for him. "Maybe." Annie glanced over from the stove, but Richard accepted the word. Maybe was kinder than no. "I was in Dallas," he said. "I told myself work couldn't wait. She told me she'd be fine. I believed the part that made my life easier." Clara leaned back in her chair. Your mother was stubborn, proud too, not mean proud, just used to handling pain with her chin up. That was her. I found her outside Fairmont Pharmacy. She had one hand on the brick wall and the other on her chest. I asked if she had an inhaler. She shook her head. Couldn't get words out. I had one in my bag because my sister May had asthma bad back then. I gave it to her, called 911, and waited. Rain started coming sideways. She kept trying to stand straight like being sick in public was impolite. Richard gave a pained laugh. That was also her. The ambulance was delayed. She didn't want to go to the hospital. Said she'd had enough of hospitals. I wasn't about to leave her there, so I brought her here. Annie was little, slept through most of it. Annie brought 3 bowls to the table and set one in front of Richard without asking. Mama thinks soup is part of every serious conversation. It is, Clara said. Richard looked down at the bowl. Chicken, carrots, celery, rice, black pepper floating on the surface. Plain, hot, human. His throat tightened. Did she eat? Some. Not enough. But she tried because I fussed at her. Richard smiled faintly. You fussed at Margaret Whitmore? I did not know she was Margaret Whitmore at the time, and after I knew, I still fussed. Breathing comes before manners. Annie hid a small smile at the stove. Clara continued. At night, she couldn't sleep. Pain and worry will do that. She asked if I minded if she sang a little. I said, Ma'am, this house has heard babies crying, bills being argued over, and my neighbor's dog barking at shadows. A song won't hurt it, so she sang. Richard did not move. The same song? He asked. The same bones of it. Words shifted. Melody stayed. Clara's eyes lowered. She said she sang it to her boy when storms scared him. Said he hated thunder but would never admit it once he got older. Richard put one hand over his mouth. Clara's voice softened. She loved you very much. He nodded, but the motion broke halfway. I know. No, Clara said gently. You know it in your head. That's not always the same as letting it reach the places that hurt. The kitchen blurred. Richard looked away, toward the small window above the sink. Outside, a neighbor pushed a lawnmower slowly along a strip of grass. Life went on with no respect for grief, and somehow that made grief easier to bear. I came to thank you, he said. Clara watched him carefully. Richard pushed the envelope across the table. This is not money, it's a letter. I wrote it because I didn't trust myself to say everything without making a mess of it. Clara did not touch it yet. I failed my mother by not finding you sooner, he said. But I am grateful she was not alone. I am grateful she was in a kitchen where someone treated her like a person, not a problem. Clara's fingers moved to the envelope. You don't need to punish yourself in my kitchen, Mr. Whitmore. Richard, please. Richard, she said, trying the name once. Your mother did not speak of you like a man who failed her. She spoke of you like a son she missed. That undid him more than accusation would have. He lowered his head, breathing through it. Annie stood still near the counter, her own eyes wet. She had never seen a man like Richard Whitmore cry at her mother's table. She had seen men shout, boast, bargain, and leave. She had seen rich men on television speak about communities they never entered. But Richard sat there with soup cooling in front of him and grief open in his hands. After a while, Clara opened the envelope and read the letter silently. Richard did not watch her face. He looked at the table instead, at a tiny burn mark near the salt shaker, at a scratch in the wood, at proof that this table had held real life. When Clara finished, she folded the letter once and set it beside her bowl. Thank you, she said. No, thank you. She gave him a look. Don't start that back and forth. We'll be here all day. For the first time, Richard laughed. Annie did too, softly. Then Clara reached into the pocket of her cardigan. There is something else. Annie turned. Mama? Clara pulled out a folded white handkerchief, yellowed with age but clean, with the letters M.W. stitched in pale blue thread. Richard stopped breathing for a second. She left it here, Clara said. I tried to return it, but she told me to keep it until she could come back for tea. Clara looked down at the cloth. She never came back. Richard took it with both hands. The fabric was thin, soft from age. His thumb brushed the initials. My father gave her these, he said. A dozen, I think. She always carried one. There's something inside. Richard looked up. Clara nodded. I didn't open it for years. When I did, I figured if the day ever came, it belonged to you. With careful fingers, Richard unfolded the handkerchief. A small slip of paper rested inside, creased and faded. The handwriting was his mother's. If my son ever finds you, tell him I was not alone. Tell him kindness found me when my own world could not." Richard read it once, then again. The kitchen disappeared around him. Dallas disappeared. The boardrooms, the sleepless nights, the polished mansion, the years of guilt, all of it fell away until only his mother's handwriting remained. Annie's voice came softly from across the room. "Mr. Whitmore?" He pressed the paper to his lips, not caring how it looked. For the first time in years, Richard did not feel that his mother had vanished in a hospital bed, beyond his reach. He felt her here, in this small kitchen, in Clara's soup, in Annie's song, in a handkerchief held safe by a woman who had never asked the world to honor her for doing what was right. Outside, the driver waited by the curb. Back at the mansion, Victoria waited with suspicion. But for that moment, Richard Whitmore sat at Clara Carter's table and understood something his wealth had hidden from him for too long. Some debts were not paid with money. They were paid by remembering. Richard returned to the mansion just before dusk, carrying the handkerchief in his breast pocket and the folded note inside his jacket, as if it were a living thing. He had left Clara's house with more than proof. He had left with the taste of chicken soup still on his tongue, the sound of Annie washing bowls at the sink, and the feeling that his mother had not disappeared into silence the way he had believed. Someone had held her hand. Someone had warmed broth for her. Someone had listened when she sang. The sedan rolled through the iron gates, and the Whitmore mansion appeared at the top of the drive, white columns lit by garden lamps, windows glowing gold against the darkening sky. For years, Richard had mistaken that glow for home. Now, after Clara Carter's kitchen, it looked staged, too polished to breathe. Victoria was waiting in the foyer. She wore cream silk, pearls at her throat, and the calm face she used when anger had been dressed for company. Ethan stood a few feet behind her near the staircase, one hand in his pocket, watching his father with the cautious expression of someone who knew a storm had already started. "Well?" Victoria asked. Richard handed his coat to Mrs. Ellery, who had appeared silently at his side. "Good evening to you, too." "Don't do that," Victoria said. "Don't walk in here as if you didn't just spend the afternoon in a stranger's kitchen. She's not a stranger." Victoria's eyes moved to his pocket. "What did they give you?" Richard looked at her. "They? The Carters, Annie and her mother. What did they give you that has you looking like you've seen a ghost?" Ethan straightened. "Mom, no, I want to know." Victoria stepped closer. "Because this family has lived with his grief for years, and now a maid and her sick mother have somehow become the only people allowed to touch it." Richard's patience was thin, but Clara's kitchen had quieted something in him. He did not want to shout in the foyer like a man defending himself in a courthouse. "Clara Carter helped my mother when I wasn't there," he said. "She kept her safe. She fed her. She sat with her. Mother left something behind for me." Victoria's face changed before she could hide it. "Something?" Richard reached into his jacket and took out the folded note. He did not hand it to her. He held it where she could see the age of the paper and the careful handwriting. "My mother's words." Ethan came down one step. "Grandma wrote that?" Richard nodded. "What does it say?" Richard's fingers tightened on the paper. "It says she was not alone." For once, Ethan said nothing. The sentence landed on him with the weight Richard had carried for years without knowing he had been carrying it wrong. Victoria looked from the note to Richard. "And we are simply accepting this? An old piece of paper appears in a poor woman's house, and suddenly it's sacred?" Richard folded the note slowly. "Be very careful what you say next." Victoria laughed, but it trembled at the edge. "There it is again. That tone. You speak to me like I'm the enemy, because I'm the only one asking obvious questions. No, you're the only one trying to make gratitude look foolish. I'm trying to protect you. From what? A handkerchief? A bowl of soup? A woman who helped my mother breathe?" Victoria flushed. "From being used." Richard slipped the note back into his jacket. "Clara asked for nothing. Annie asked for nothing. You're the only person in this story keeping accounts." Mrs. Ellery looked down, but Richard saw the smallest movement in her face. Not a smile, not approval, just recognition. Victoria turned toward Ethan. "Do you hear him? He spent one afternoon in that neighborhood, and now I'm the villain." Ethan's jaw moved as if he were choosing his words carefully. "Mom, if Grandma wrote the note, you don't know what she wrote. You haven't seen it. I'm asking Dad." Richard looked at his son. "You can read it later if you want." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "Later? So now there are private family relics being shared according to your mood? This is not about control, Victoria. With you, it never is. It's always principle, grief, memory, honor. She stepped back, her voice rising. But where was all that honor for me? I sat through the sleepless nights. I handled the dinners you missed, the guests you ignored, the doctors you dismissed. I kept this house standing while you walked through it like a ghost. And now, one girl sings a song, and suddenly she gets the man I spent years trying to reach. The words revealed more than she meant them to. Even Ethan looked away. Richard's anger softened into something sadder. Is that what this is? Victoria's mouth tightened. Don't analyze me. I'm not. I'm finally hearing you. No, you're hearing what you want. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you had told me you felt alone, I would have listened. You don't listen, you endure. That was true enough to hurt. For a moment, Richard had no answer. He had endured grief, marriage, insomnia, public life, even love, as if endurance were nobility. Perhaps Victoria had suffered inside that endurance, but suffering did not give her the right to shame Annie or sneer at Clara. I failed you in some ways, Richard said. I won't deny that, but you don't get to punish an innocent girl because I was absent inside my own life. Victoria's eyes filled again, but the tears no longer moved him the way they once had. He had seen Clara's steady eyes that afternoon. He had seen Annie's careful dignity. He understood the difference between pain and performance now, though he wished he had learned it with less damage. Mrs. Ellery cleared her throat softly. Dinner will be served in 20 minutes, sir. Thank you. Richard turned toward her. Please, ask Annie to join us in the breakfast room afterward. Not to serve. To speak. Victoria's head snapped up. Absolutely not. Richard looked at her. She will not be summoned like she has done something wrong. She is staff. She is also the daughter of the woman who saved my mother. This is still my home. And mine, Richard said. And as long as my name is on the door, no one under this roof will be humiliated for carrying a song my mother loved. Ethan let out a slow breath. Dad, maybe Annie doesn't want to be dragged into another family fight. Richard turned toward him. You're right. That stopped everyone, including Victoria. Richard looked at Mrs. Ellery. Ask her if she is willing. If she says no, that is the end of it for tonight. Mrs. Ellery nodded. Yes, sir. Annie was in the service pantry counting napkins when Mrs. Ellery found her. She had returned from Clara's house before Richard, traveling back quietly and going straight to work. Her mother had seemed calm when Annie left, but Annie knew Clara would be tired for days after the visit. Every emotional thing cost breath. Mr. Whitmore would like to speak with you after dinner, Mrs. Ellery said. Annie's hands stilled over the napkins. Mrs. Whitmore too? Likely. Then I'd rather not. Mrs. Ellery did not look surprised. You may say that. Annie looked up. Really? He said if you decline, the matter waits. That did not sound like the Whitmore house Annie had entered 3 days ago. Is he angry? No. But Mrs. Whitmore is. Annie looked down at the neat stack of linen. She thinks Mama and I want something. Do you? No. Then let that be your spine. Annie almost smiled. My mama says things like that. Good. Listen to her. After dinner, Annie agreed to enter the breakfast room only if Mrs. Ellery remained nearby. Richard accepted before Victoria could object. Ethan sat at the table with a glass of water, looking as if he wanted to be anywhere else but knew he should stay. Annie stood near the door. You wanted to see me, sir? Richard rose. I wanted to thank you for speaking to your mother. You thanked Mama already. I did, and I'm thanking you. Victoria sat stiffly, one hand around her wineglass. For singing in the wrong room at the right time, apparently. Richard did not take the bait. For telling the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. Annie shifted. I didn't tell much. Mama told the rest. Richard took the folded handkerchief from his pocket and placed it on the table. Annie recognized it from Clara's kitchen. Seeing it in the mansion made the room feel smaller. My mother left this with yours, he said. Inside was a note. It confirms what Clara told me. Victoria stared at the handkerchief as if it had insulted her. Ethan leaned forward. Can I see it? Richard unfolded the paper and handed it to his son. Ethan read silently. His face changed little, but when he looked up, his eyes were damp. She really wrote that, he said. Yes. Ethan looked at Annie. Your mom kept it all these years? Annie nodded. She said it belonged to your family if the day ever came. Victoria gave a quiet scoff. How noble. Annie did not answer. She had learned that some words were traps disguised as invitations. Richard looked at his wife. Enough. Victoria pushed back her chair. No. I am tired of that word. She pointed toward the handkerchief. A note does not make this girl family. A song does not make her harmless. And your guilt does not give her a place at our table. The sentence struck the room hard. Annie stepped back once. Ethan said, Mom, come on. Richard's voice was quiet. Apologize. Victoria looked at him. To her? Yes. For telling the truth? For forgetting she is a human being. Victoria's face went pale with anger. I will not be corrected in front of the staff. Richard held her gaze. Then don't be cruel in front of them. The air thickened. Annie felt the old instinct to make herself small. To say it was fine. To excuse the insult so everyone else could be comfortable. But Clara's voice rose in her memory. Don't let that woman put dirt on something clean. Annie lifted her chin. Mrs. Whitmore doesn't have to apologize if she doesn't mean it. Everyone turned to her. Her voice shook, but she kept going. I know my place in this house. I work here. I'm not family. I'm not trying to be. But my mother helped Mrs. Margaret because she was sick, not because she was rich. If that makes you angry, ma'am, then I don't know what else to say. Victoria's lips parted, but no words came. Richard looked at Annie with something like respect. Ethan looked ashamed. Annie turned to Richard. May I go now, sir? He nodded. Yes. And Annie? Yes? Your mother raised you well. For the first time that night, Annie's face softened. She did her best. No, Richard said. She did more than that. Annie left the room with Mrs. Ellery behind her. In the hallway, her legs nearly gave out. But she kept walking until the door closed. Inside the breakfast room, Richard folded his mother's note and returned it to the handkerchief. Victoria stood, trembling with anger. You are choosing them over me. Richard looked at her, tired but clear. No. I am choosing the truth over the version of peace this house has been hiding behind. Ethan stared at the table. Outside the room, Annie leaned against the wall for one breath, then another. She had not sung. She had not cried. She had simply spoken. And somewhere in the house, something shifted again, not loudly, not enough for the world to notice, but enough that silence no longer belonged only to the powerful. That night, Annie slept with the lamp on. She told herself it was because the servants' room was unfamiliar, because the pipes knocked in the walls, because the hallway outside her door stayed too quiet after midnight. But the truth sat heavier than all of that. She had spoken back to Victoria Whitmore at the breakfast room table, and in a house like this, words from someone like Annie did not vanish. They waited for morning. By 6, she was dressed and in the laundry room, folding napkins with clean edges, trying not to think about Mrs. Whitmore's face. The house moved around her in its usual order. Coffee brewed in the staff kitchen. Delivery men came through the side entrance. Mrs. Ellery checked the day's schedule with a pencil in hand. Nothing looked different, yet Annie could feel the shift. People glanced at her and looked away too quickly. Mr. Alvarez gave her an extra biscuit wrapped in a paper towel without saying why. At 8, Ethan stepped into the service hall holding a travel mug. He looked uncomfortable, as if he had practiced something upstairs and lost most of it on the way down. Annie, he said. She turned from the linen cart. Good morning, Mr. Ethan. Just Ethan is fine. She gave a polite nod but did not repeat it. He glanced toward the kitchen. I wanted to apologize for last night. You didn't do anything to me. I sat there. Annie looked at him then. He rubbed his thumb along the side of the mug. Sometimes sitting there is doing something. I know that now. She did not soften right away. Your mother was upset. That doesn't excuse it. No, sir, it doesn't. He accepted that without flinching, which surprised her. Dad asked me to read Grandma's note again this morning. I did. I don't know what to do with it. Annie picked up a folded towel. Maybe you don't have to do anything yet. That's not how my family works. We turn everything into a decision. My mama says some things should be sat with before they're solved. Ethan gave a small smile. Your mother sounds better than most of our consultants. Annie almost smiled back, but caught herself. I need to finish these. Right. He stepped aside, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad my grandmother wasn't alone. Annie's hands slowed. So am I, she said. By late morning, Richard had not come downstairs. Mrs. Ellery said he had slept until almost 9, which sent a quiet ripple through the staff. The cook crossed himself. One maid whispered, 9? As if someone had announced a miracle in the pantry. Annie pretended not to hear, but the news followed her from room to room. Richard Whitmore had slept. Not all night, Mrs. Ellery said. Not like a man healed in one evening. But he had slept longer than usual. And when he woke, he had not called for medication or black coffee or the doctor. He had asked for oatmeal, toast, and the handkerchief. Around noon, Annie was dusting the shelves in the small library when Richard appeared at the doorway. He wore a dark sweater instead of a suit. And without the armor of business clothes, he looked more human. Still tired, still marked by years of broken sleep, but clearer. "May I come in?" he asked. Annie almost laughed at the strangeness of him asking permission in his own house. "It's your library, sir. That wasn't what I asked." She lowered the dust cloth. "Yes, sir." He stepped inside but kept distance between them. "Mrs. Ellery tells me you'll be staying through Friday. That's what the schedule says. If you wish to leave earlier because of what happened, I won't stop you. I'll make sure the agency does not penalize you." Annie looked at the shelf, not at him. "I need the job. I know. That's why I'm asking, not offering escape dressed up as kindness." The sentence made her look at him. Richard smiled faintly, tiredly. "Mrs. Carter gave me a few lessons yesterday without trying. My mama does that. I believe it." A quiet settled between them, less sharp than before. Richard reached into his pocket and took out a folded piece of paper, but not the old note. This one was new, white, crisp. "I wrote your mother again this morning," he said. "Not a letter to thank her. I did that already. This is an invitation." Annie stiffened. "To what?" "A dinner here. Nothing formal. No press. No board members. No charity people. Just your mother, you, Ethan, Mrs. Ellery, if she'll tolerate it, and me." Annie's grip tightened on the dust cloth. "And Mrs. Whitmore?" Richard did not answer fast enough. Annie understood. "She won't want us here. She already doesn't want you here." "That doesn't mean she decides whether gratitude enters through the front door. My mother doesn't need to be put on display." "She won't be." Annie shook her head. "You don't understand. People with money say simple dinner, and then someone brings out silver forks and makes a woman feel ashamed for not knowing which one to use." Richard absorbed that. "Then no silver forks." "That's not what I mean." "I know." He folded the invitation once. What would make her comfortable? Annie almost said nothing in this house could make Clara comfortable. Then she thought of her mother's voice. "Don't answer pride with pride unless you're ready to pay for it." "Let her bring something," Annie said. Richard blinked. "Bring something?" "Food. A pie, cornbread, anything. Mama feels better when her hands have a reason to be there." His expression softened. "Then she may bring anything she likes. And don't make a speech." "I'm prone to speeches?" "You're a billionaire, sir." For the first time, Richard laughed. A real laugh that startled both of them. It lasted only a second, but it warmed the room. "Fair enough," he said. "No speeches." Annie took the invitation carefully. "I'll ask her. I won't promise. I wouldn't expect you to." Before he left, he looked back at her. "I slept this morning." "I heard." "Of course you did. Houses are terrible at keeping secrets. This one especially." His smile faded into something thoughtful. "Last night, I tried to remember the lullaby. I could only find pieces. I hummed them badly." Annie remembered hearing him through the wall. "I didn't say anything." "I appreciate that." He started to go, then stopped. "Would it offend you if I asked you not to sing it for me yet?" Annie was surprised. "You don't want me to?" "I do, too much. That's why I'm asking myself to wait until I understand where it came from. I don't want to take comfort from something before I honor the people who carried it." Annie did not know what to do with that kind of care. It made her wary, because it sounded almost too careful. But it also sounded like a man trying to learn. "I'll tell Mama," she said. Richard nodded and left. The invitation stayed in Annie's apron pocket for the rest of the afternoon. A small square of weight she could feel each time she bent or turned. She called Clara during her break. "A dinner?" Clara said. He said nothing formal. "Rich folks say that and still put parsley on plates like it pays rent." Annie smiled. "I told him no speeches." "Good. And I said you should be allowed to bring something." Clara was quiet, then gave a low hum. "Did you now? I thought it might help." "It does." Clara coughed lightly. "If I go, I'm bringing cornbread. Not that sweet cake kind either. Real cornbread." He said, "Anything you like." "And his wife?" "She'll be there, I think." "Mem." That means no? That means I'm thinking. Clara took a breath. That woman insulted you. Yes. And he let me sit at my own table yesterday and speak my piece. Yes. And his mother left that note. Yes, ma'am. Clara sighed. Then maybe I owe Margaret one visit to her house. You don't owe anyone. No. Baby. But gratitude isn't always about debt. Sometimes it's about closing a door properly so it doesn't keep banging in the wind. Annie leaned against the pantry wall. Are you sure? No, but I'll come. That evening, Richard informed Victoria. She was in the formal dining room speaking with the florist again, replacing white orchids with pale roses, as if flowers could restore control. Ethan stood by the sideboard, scrolling through his phone but listening. Clara, Carter, and Annie will join us for dinner Thursday, Richard said. Victoria went still. No. It wasn't a question. She turned slowly. You are inviting the maid and her mother to dinner in my dining room? In our breakfast room, and Annie is not serving. She works here. Not that night. Victoria laughed under her breath. This is punishment. No, this is respect. For them. Yes. And what about respect for me? Richard looked at her for a long moment. Respect does not mean letting you mistreat people so you can feel safe. Her face tightened. You have become very brave since someone sang you to sleep. Ethan muttered, Mom, don't. Victoria shot him a look. Stay out of this. Richard's voice stayed level. Thursday, 7 o'clock. You may attend politely, or you may not attend. You would let them sit at the table without your wife? I would rather have my wife at the table with Grace. Victoria's eyes shone with anger, but she said nothing more. On Thursday evening, Clara arrived with Annie through the front door. Not the service entrance, not the back hall. The front door beneath the high white columns, where guests with last names engraved on silver invitations usually stood. Clara wore a navy dress and carried a covered pan wrapped in a clean towel. Annie walked beside her, one hand close but not touching, ready if her mother's breathing changed. Mrs. Ellery opened the door herself. Mrs. Carter, she said with a small nod. Welcome. Clara looked past her into the bright foyer, then at Annie. Well, she said softly, I suppose Margaret finally got me here for tea. Annie's throat tightened. From the top of the foyer, Richard appeared. He came down the stairs slowly, not as a host making an entrance, but as a son trying not to let emotion outrun manners. Mrs. Carter, he said. Clara lifted the covered pan a little. I brought cornbread. Richard smiled. Then this house is already better than it was 10 minutes ago. For a moment, even Annie forgot to be afraid. Then Victoria appeared at the dining room entrance, dressed in black, elegant as a closed door. Her eyes went first to Clara, then to the pan in her hands, then to Annie. How charming, Victoria said. You brought food. Clara met her gaze calmly. Yes, ma'am. Where I come from, you don't enter a house empty-handed if you can help it. Victoria smiled thinly. And where I come from, guests usually wait to be asked. Richard's expression changed. But before he could speak, Clara answered, gentle and steady. Then tonight we both get to learn something. Victoria's smile stayed in place, but the room felt colder after Clara spoke. Annie held her breath, afraid her mother had gone too far, then ashamed for thinking it. Clara had not raised her voice. She had not insulted anyone. She had simply refused to shrink at the front door. Richard stepped down into the foyer. Mrs. Carter, let me take that. Clara held the covered pan closer. No, sir, I carried it this far. I can carry it to the table. A small smile touched Richard's mouth. Fair enough. Ethan came from the hall then, dressed in a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled once at the wrist. He looked nervous but sincere. Mrs. Carter, I'm Ethan. Clara looked him over. You're Margaret's grandson. Yes, ma'am. You have her forehead. Ethan blinked, then laughed softly. I don't think anyone's ever told me that. People miss what they don't know to look for. That quieted him. He stepped aside as Mrs. Ellery led them toward the breakfast room instead of the formal dining room. Richard had kept his word. No long table under a chandelier. No row of forks waiting to embarrass anyone. The breakfast room was warm with lamplight, the round table set for 5, and in the center sat a simple vase of yellow flowers. Not orchids, not roses. Daffodils, the kind Clara might have grown beside a porch. Annie noticed and looked at Richard. He said nothing, but his eyes told her he had chosen them on purpose. Victoria noticed too. Her mouth tightened. Clara set the cornbread on the sideboard, removed the towel, and looked around. This is a pretty room. It was my mother's favorite for breakfast, Richard said. Victoria pulled out her chair. Margaret liked many rooms. Richard ignored the edge in her voice. She said this one got the morning light right. They sat. Annie hesitated before choosing a chair, still half expecting someone to direct her back toward the kitchen. Mrs. Ellery, standing near the door, gave her a small nod. Annie sat beside Clara. Mr. Alvarez served roasted chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, and Clara's cornbread warmed in a basket. Richard had asked that the meal be plain, not because Clara was plain, but because comfort did not need decoration. Still, the silverware shone, the glasses caught the light, and Annie's hands felt too aware of themselves. Ethan reached for the cornbread first. "May I?" Clara passed the basket to him. "If you put sugar on it, don't tell me." Ethan grinned. "I wouldn't dare." Richard took a piece and broke it open. Steam rose from the center. He tasted it and closed his eyes for a second. "This is excellent." Clara looked at him over her water glass. "You sound surprised." "No, grateful." "That's better." Annie pressed her lips together to hide a smile. Victoria saw it. "So, Mrs. Carter," Victoria said, cutting into her chicken, "Annie tells us you sing." Clara did not rush to answer. "Sometimes. Professionally? No, ma'am. Mostly while cooking, cleaning, or trying to keep a child from crying." "How humble." Richard looked up. "Victoria." "What?" "I'm making conversation." She turned back to Clara. "And this lullaby. Did Margaret teach it to you as some kind of keepsake?" Clara's fork paused. "No. She sang because she was hurting. I listened because she needed someone to listen." "That sounds almost poetic." "It was more practical than poetic. She couldn't sleep, and neither could I." Ethan glanced at his mother, then at Clara. "Did she talk about Dad?" Clara's face softened. "A lot." Richard stopped eating. "She said he was stubborn," Clara continued. "Said he pretended not to be afraid of storms but always slept better if she left the hallway light on. Said he asked too many questions as a boy and then grew into a man who answered too many before other people finished talking." Ethan smiled. "That still sounds right." Richard breathed out a small laugh, but his eyes were wet. Victoria set her fork down. Margaret shared quite a bit with a stranger. Clara met her gaze. "Sick people often tell the truth faster. They don't have the breath to decorate it." The table went quiet. Richard looked at Clara. Did she seem afraid? Clara did not answer right away. Annie felt her mother weighing kindness against honesty. "She seemed tired," Clara said. "Not only in her body, in her spirit. But when she spoke of you, she wasn't afraid. She was sorry." Richard's voice lowered. "Sorry for what?" "For leaving you with too much house and not enough home." The words struck him so cleanly that he looked away. Annie's chest tightened. She wanted to reach for Clara's hand, but she also knew this was the reason they had come. Not for charity, not for ceremony. For the truth that had waited too long. Victoria pushed her chair back slightly. "This is becoming dramatic." Ethan said quietly, "Mom, let him hear it." Victoria stared at her son. "You too? I just think Dad has a right to know what Grandma said. And you think this woman knows Margaret better than we do?" Clara laid her napkin beside her plate. "No, ma'am. I knew her for 3 days. But sometimes 3 honest days tell more than 30 polite years." Victoria's face reddened. "You come into my house and lecture me?" "I came because your husband asked me to. I brought cornbread because my mother raised me right. I have not lectured you yet." Ethan coughed into his napkin. Annie looked down fast. Richard's mouth twitched, but he kept his tone steady. "Victoria, if you can't be civil, you may leave. This is my table." "It is a table," he said. "Tonight it holds guests." Victoria's eyes flashed. "Guests? Is that what we're calling them now?" Annie felt the old sting, but Clara touched her knee under the table before she could move. Richard folded his hands. "Yes, guests." For several seconds, the only sound was the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Then Clara reached into her purse and took out a small plastic bag. Inside was a faded photograph. She slid it across the table to Richard. "I found this after you left," she said. "Thought you might want to see it." Richard picked it up carefully. The photo showed Margaret Whitmore sitting at Clara's kitchen table years ago. Thinner than Richard remembered. Wrapped in a quilt. Smiling faintly at something outside the frame. A mug sat before her. Beside it was the same cornbread pan now cooling on the Whitmore sideboard. Richard touched the edge of the picture. Ethan leaned closer. "That's Grandma?" "Yes," Richard whispered. Victoria's expression changed despite herself. The photograph was harder to dismiss than a story. Margaret's face, Clara's kitchen, the proof of ordinary mercy, all of it sat there between them. She asked me not to take it, Clara said she looked a fright. I told her women who survive a bad night are allowed to look like they survived it. Richard smiled through tears. She hated photographs. I noticed. Annie watched him hold the photo as if it might vanish. For the first time since this began, she felt the table soften. Even Victoria said nothing. After dinner, Richard asked if Clara would sit with him in the small library for a few minutes. Clara agreed, but only if Annie came too. Victoria did not follow. Ethan did. In the library, Richard placed the photo beside the handkerchief and the note on a low table. 3 small things: a song, a cloth, a picture. Together, they had more power than the portraits lining the mansion walls. I don't know how to thank you, Richard said. Clara sat with both hands resting on her cane. You start by sleeping. He looked at her, surprised. She nodded toward Annie. And you stop making that child feel like peace is something she has to apologize for. Richard turned to Annie. You don't. Annie looked down. It feels like I do. I'm sorry. Clara clicked her tongue softly. There you go again, apologizing. Apologies are good. Change is better. Ethan murmured. I like her. Clara looked at him. Good. Then listen. Richard gave a tired smile. I'm listening. Clara leaned back. Your mother did not want you trapped in grief. She told me that. She said, my Richard thinks if he keeps working, loss won't catch him. Then she laughed like she knew you too well. Richard closed his eyes. Let the song be a door, Clara said, not a chain. Annie felt those words settle into the room. Later, when Clara grew tired, Richard had the driver take her home. Annie rode with her to help her settle, then returned to the mansion because her work week was not over. Before leaving, Clara held Richard's hand at the door. Don't turn my daughter's kindness into a burden, she said. I won't. Don't say it fast, mean it slow. Richard nodded. I will try. That night, the house was quieter than usual. Victoria remained in her room. Ethan went out onto the back terrace and called someone in a low voice. Mrs. Ellery checked the locks. Annie was folding dish towels in the service pantry when Richard appeared at the doorway. I won't ask you to sing, he said. I know. But may I ask one thing? She waited. Would you write down the words you remember? Only if you're comfortable. Annie thought of Clara, of Margaret in the photograph, of Victoria's mockery, of Richard's face when he saw his mother wrapped in that old quilt. I can try, she said. Thank you. He turned to leave, then stopped. Annie? Yes, sir. For what it's worth, your mother's cornbread may have saved this house from itself tonight. Annie finally smiled a little. Mama would say it needed more salt. Richard laughed quietly and walked away. In her small room, Annie sat at the desk with a notepad. She wrote the first line she remembered, then the second. The words looked plain on paper, not nearly as warm as when Clara sang them. Still, she kept writing. Across the hall and up the stairs, Richard lay in bed with the old photograph on the nightstand. He did not turn on the sleep machine. He did not take the second pill waiting beside the water glass. Instead, he hummed the broken melody, gentler this time, without spite, without anger. Sometime after midnight, for the second time in a week, sleep came to him not as a battle, but as a hand laid softly on his brow. By morning, Richard knew something had changed because he woke before the alarm and did not feel angry at the day for arriving. He lay still for a while, staring at the pale light spreading across the ceiling. The photograph of his mother sat on the nightstand beside the folded handkerchief. In the picture, Margaret Whitmore sat in Clara Carter's kitchen with a quilt around her shoulders and a tired smile on her face. Richard had looked at that photograph until sleep took him, and for the first time in years, the image had not cut him, it had held him. He reached for the water glass, then stopped when he noticed the pill beside it. The small white tablet had waited there all night, untouched. Richard sat up slowly. The room did not spin. His head did not throb. His chest did not feel packed with wet cement. He was tired, but it was a clean tiredness, the kind that came after sleep instead of the kind that came from fighting for it. Victoria was not in bed beside him. Her side was smooth and cold. He found her in the morning room 20 minutes later, seated with coffee, a tablet, and a face arranged for battle. She looked up as he entered. You slept, she said. I did. No pill? No. Her fingers tightened around the cup. Wonderful. Should I send Annie flowers? Richard pulled out the chair across from her. You could start with not saying her name like an accusation. Victoria set the cup down. I am trying very hard not to say what I think. You usually don't struggle with that. Her eyes flashed. Careful, Richard. He almost answered in the same tone, then stopped. Clara's voice came back to him. Don't say it fast. Mean it slow. I don't want to fight this morning, he said. Then stop inviting it into my house. Our house. My home, she said. The one I kept presentable while you slept in chairs, forgot dinners, missed birthdays, and walked around like the dead were better company than the living. Richard absorbed the blow because part of it was true. Ethan came in before he could answer, wearing a running jacket and holding his phone. He noticed the air in the room and slowed. Bad time? Victoria took her coffee again. Your father slept. We're all expected to celebrate. Ethan looked at Richard. You did? Richard nodded. A few hours. That's good. It is. Ethan glanced at his mother, then sat. Grandma's photo is still in the library? On my nightstand now, Richard said. Victoria laughed under her breath. Of course it is. Ethan turned to her. Mom, why does that bother you so much? Victoria stared at him. Excuse me? I'm asking. Grandma was Dad's mother. Mrs. Carter helped her. Why is that an insult to us? Because you're young enough to think every story is as clean as it sounds, and you're angry enough to make every story dirty. The sentence surprised everyone, including Ethan. He looked down, then back up. I'm sorry, but it's true. Victoria rose from the table. I will not sit here and be judged by my husband and my son before breakfast. Richard stood too. No one is judging you for being afraid. She turned on him. Don't you dare make me small with that gentle voice. I'm not. Yes, you are. You have all become so noble. Richard, with his dead mother's note. Ethan with his sudden conscience. Annie with her wounded eyes. Clara with her cornbread wisdom. And I am what? The cruel wife? The jealous white woman in the way of everyone's healing? No one answered. That silence was answer enough. Victoria's face hardened. Fine. She left the room, her coffee untouched. Ethan exhaled. That went well. Richard gave him a tired look. Sorry, Ethan said. Not funny. It was a little funny. Ethan smiled despite himself, then grew serious. Dad, she's not going to let this go. I know. What are you going to do? Richard looked toward the window, where the morning sun touched the wet garden. I'm going to stop letting peace depend on everyone pretending. That afternoon, Annie felt the change before she heard anything. Mrs. Whitmore passed her in the hall without speaking. That should have been a relief, but it was not. Victoria's silence had edges. It made the other staff nervous. Even Mrs. Ellery checked the silver inventory twice and told Annie not to enter the West Wing unless asked. Annie kept busy. She polished the small table in the upstairs hall, changed towels in the guest bath, and carried a basket of linen down the back stairs. She did not hum. The urge sat at the back of her throat all day, but she pressed it down. Near 3, Mrs. Ellery found her in the pantry. Mr. Whitmore would like the words you wrote down. Annie touched her apron pocket. I have them. You may give them to him in the library. Door open. Annie nodded and walked through the service hallway, past the breakfast room, past the sitting room where everything had begun. The library door stood open. Richard was inside with Ethan. Papers were spread across the low table. The photograph, the note, the handkerchief, and a legal pad in Richard's handwriting. Annie stopped at the doorway. Mrs. Ellery said you asked for this. Richard stood. Thank you. She handed him the folded page. He did not open it right away. Ethan nodded to her. Hi, Annie. Good afternoon. Richard unfolded the paper carefully. Annie had written only the words she could remember. Some lines were incomplete. Some were just sounds Clara used when the words ran out. Richard read them once, then again, his face changing with each line. That one, he said softly, pointing. Sleep, child. The storm has feet but no hands. Annie nodded. Mama says that part when thunder is loud. My mother used to say thunder was the sky moving furniture. Ethan smiled. That sounds like her from the stories. Richard lowered the page. Would you mind if I kept a copy? You can keep that one. No, if it's in your hand, it belongs to you. I'll copy it. Annie did not know why that mattered, but it did. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Dad wants to look through Grandma's old things. Richard gave him a look. Ethan. What? It's true. Annie stepped back slightly. I should get back to work. Richard stopped her gently. Before you go, I want you to know something. I've asked Mrs. Ellery to adjust your duties. You won't be assigned to private family rooms unless you agree. You won't be alone with anyone who makes you uncomfortable. And if Mrs. Whitmore speaks to you about anything beyond work, you may ask for Mrs. Ellery. Annie stared at him. Sir, I don't want to cause problems. You didn't cause them. She'll think I complained. Lit here. That answer sounded simple, because he had the power to make it simple. Annie did not. Ethan seemed to understand. Dad, maybe make it a household policy. For everyone. Not just Annie. Richard looked at him, then nodded. You're right. Annie looked between them. A policy? Respect in the workplace, Ethan said. Crazy concept for a mansion, I know. Richard almost smiled. Mrs. Ellery will draft it. Annie held back a smile of her own. She'll enjoy that. Yes, Richard said. I believe she will. When Annie left, Ethan looked at his father. You know Mom will see that as war. Richard looked at the folded lyrics. Then she has misunderstood peace for too long. Upstairs, Victoria stood in her dressing room, while her personal assistant packed 2 gowns for a charity luncheon in Savannah. She had intended to leave for 2 days, let Richard's sentimental fever burn out, and return when the house remembered who had run it for years. But when a staff member quietly mentioned that Mr. Whitmore was preparing new household conduct rules, her calm snapped. Conduct rules? She repeated. The assistant kept folding. That's what I heard, ma'am. For whom? For everyone, I believe. Victoria dismissed her with a wave and waited until the door closed. Then she called Marlene Price, her closest friend and the chair of 3 charity boards where reputation mattered more than compassion. Marlene answered on the 3rd ring. Tell me you're not canceling Thursday. I may have a problem. With Richard? With a maid. There was a pause, then Marlene gave a soft laugh. Those are usually solved with a severance check. This one has attached herself to Richard's grief. Dangerous. Her mother claims she helped Margaret years ago. Claims? There's a note. Victoria stood very still. Don't say it like that. Like what? Like it matters. My dear, anything with a dead mother's handwriting matters if a man is lonely enough. Victoria looked at herself in the mirror. For a moment, she saw not a wife, not a hostess, not a woman wronged, but someone losing control of the story inside her own house. What would you do? She asked. Marlene did not hesitate. Remove the girl before the story grows legs. She lives here for the month. Then shorten the month. Victoria's eyes hardened. Richard won't allow it. Then don't make it about Richard. Make it about trust. After the call, Victoria stood by the window overlooking the service drive. Below, Annie crossed from the laundry entrance to the side garden with a basket of linens. She walked quickly, head down, careful as always. Victoria watched her with a cold clarity. The girl did not look dangerous. That was what made her dangerous. By evening, Richard had copied the lullaby by hand and placed Annie's original page in an envelope to return to her. He took his mother's old storage boxes from the upstairs archive. Letters, programs, photographs, a few diaries with brittle covers. Ethan joined him in the library. And for the first time in years, father and son sat together without a screen, a lawyer, or business between them. They found receipts from Fairmont Pharmacy, old appointment cards, a church bulletin with Margaret's handwriting in the margin. Nothing dramatic yet, only fragments. But fragments mattered now. Annie passed the library once with fresh towels and saw them bent over the boxes. Richard looked up. Annie, he said. I copied the song. Thank you. She nodded. You're welcome, sir. Tell your mother I'm looking. Annie understood. Not looking for money. Not looking for a way to repay and close the matter. Looking for Margaret. Looking for the part of himself he had buried beside her. I'll tell her. That night, Annie returned to her small room and found an envelope slipped under her door. For one fearful second, she thought it was from Victoria, but the handwriting on the front was neat and formal. For Annie Carter. Inside was her original page of lullaby lyrics and a note from Richard. You trusted me with something that belonged to your mother. I am returning it because some things should not be taken, even with gratitude. Thank you. Annie sat on the bed and read it twice. Across the house, Richard fell asleep with Margaret's diary open beside him. Down the hall, Victoria did not sleep at all. She sat at her vanity in the dark, turning a diamond bracelet around her wrist, thinking about trust, appearances, and how easily a story could be bent if enough people heard the wrong version first. The next morning, Victoria did not come down for breakfast. Her absence should have made the house easier to breathe in, but it did the opposite. Annie noticed how the staff moved with extra care, how Mrs. Ellery checked the silver cabinet before anyone had asked, how Mr. Alvarez kept glancing toward the hallway, as if a storm might enter wearing pearls. Richard stayed in the library with Ethan until noon, sorting through Margaret's old boxes. They found letters from church friends, appointment cards from doctors, faded receipts from pharmacies, and a small notebook filled with recipes Margaret had written in blue ink. Nothing in the boxes accused anyone. Nothing explained why Margaret had spent those nights in Clara's kitchen, or why the lullaby had traveled from one mother to another. Still, Richard handled every scrap as if the paper could bruise. Annie passed the library twice with fresh linens. Both times Richard looked up and nodded, but he did not call her in. That small restraint mattered to her more than she expected. He had questions. Anyone could see that, but he was learning not to pull answers from people just because he had the power to ask. Around 1, Mrs. Ellery found Annie in the service pantry. "Mrs. Whitmore wants to see you." Annie's stomach tightened. "About work?" She didn't say. "Then I'd rather have you there." Mrs. Ellery's eyes softened by 1 degree. "I expected that. Come." Victoria was in the morning room, seated beside a low table with a leather folder in front of her. She had dressed for the day with care. Pale blouse, dark slacks, gold watch, no wasted movement. Her eyes went first to Mrs. Ellery. "They asked for Annie." "And she asked for me," Mrs. Ellery said. "Mr. Whitmore's new household policy seems to be arriving ahead of schedule." Victoria's smile barely moved. "How efficient." Annie stood near the doorway. "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" Victoria touched the leather folder but did not open it. "I wanted to offer you a way out before this becomes uglier than it needs to be." Annie said nothing. "You're young. Your mother is ill. You need money. There is no shame in that." "There's shame in some ways people offer it," Annie said before she could stop herself. Mrs. Ellery's eyes flicked toward her, not warning exactly, but caution. Victoria opened the folder. Inside was a document and a check. Annie saw enough zeros to make her breath catch. "This is a severance agreement," Victoria said. "You will resign effective today. You will return to the agency with an excellent reference. Your mother will receive medical assistance for 1 year through a private fund. In exchange, you and Mrs. Carter will not contact my husband again. You will not speak about Margaret Whitmore, this house, that song, or any private family matter." Annie stared at the check. For 1 dangerous second, she saw rent paid ahead. Clara's inhalers lined up without fear of cost. A doctor's visit without Annie calculating groceries in her head. She saw relief, real relief, and hated that Victoria knew exactly where to aim. Mrs. Ellery spoke first. "Mrs. Whitmore, has Mr. Whitmore approved this? This is my household. It is his mother's name involved." Victoria's eyes cut to her. "You may leave if you've forgotten yours." Mrs. Ellery did not move. Annie looked up from the check. "My mother didn't help Mrs. Margaret for money." "I didn't say she did." "Yes, ma'am, you did, just not straight." Victoria closed the folder halfway. "Be careful, Annie." "I'm trying to be." Annie's voice shook, but she kept it low. "That's why I'm not signing." Victoria leaned back. "You haven't even read it. I don't need to read words that tell my mother to disappear. This is more money than you will earn in years." "I know. And you would refuse it out of pride?" Annie thought of Clara's kitchen, the chipped bowl, the cornbread pan, the song that had crossed from Margaret's pain into Clara's care. "No, ma'am. I'm refusing because some money doesn't pay bills. It buys silence." Victoria's face hardened. "Silence is often wiser than self-importance." Annie nodded once, as if considering it. "Maybe. But my mama says truth often makes trouble before it makes room." Mrs. Ellery looked down, hiding something close to approval. Victoria stood.